Hello, and welcome to the 11th episode of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
And today we're talking about philosophy and faith in the medieval ages, from Augustine to Maimonides. And we are actually re-recording this episode because we recorded it last night and then realized that I had not been getting the audio through to the laptop here, and it sounded terrible. So we're back.
It is now lost for all time.
Yes.
I had a lot of brilliant comments. I had a couple stupid ones too, so I'm kind of happy about re-recording.
Well, that's silver lining.
I felt like I insulted some people, but I can't remember.
I'm sure you did.
Okay. Well, I'll have to pick out different people to insult today.
And before we begin, I have to remind everyone of the announcement that I made last night.
Yes.
That we have a Twitter, and you can find us on Twitter at Unlimited Opinions. Unlimited had to be abbreviated, so it's capital U LMTD, capital O Opinions. Do you not have anything to remark on that? You made a lot of comments about it last night. No remarks tonight.
Well, no, just that you abbreviated the word unlimited.
Yes,
so
I thought that was very ironic.
Yeah, I was kind of frustrated with that, actually.
Yes. Should I have abbreviated opinions?
I don't know. Can you abbreviate opinions?
I guess you could take the vowels out of it.
Yeah, but then it's...
I don't think that's anywhere close to what it would be.
No, it's fine.
Right.
It is ironic.
Yes, it is ironic. Yes. And so we start off with just an introduction to medieval philosophy, and Anthony Kenny kind of points out three big problems in studying this type of philosophy, and those are linguistic, professional, and confessional problems. So a big problem was just the translations into Latin. They're moving on to a different, more complicated, convoluted form of Latin, usually when they're writing philosophy.
I didn't know there were different forms of Latin over time.
Mm-hmm. It's just like English.
I took Latin in college.
Really?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
That was my foreign language, Latin.
Interesting.
Yes.
I've taken some Duolingo Latin courses.
I don't know what that is.
It's an app. You can
that's one of those things you young people are doing. No, I took the first semester because I was thinking about getting a minor in classical studies, and I would have, but they never offered the sole required course for a minor in classical studies.
What was that?
Classical studies.
Oh.
Like intro to classical studies is like the only thing that required. Everything else was electives, and they never had that one. So I never got it, although I never bothered to ask someone to have it. But I
could have had a personal class. Just you, classical studies.
Who knows? But I took one semester of Latin and regretted it halfway through.
Really?
Because I was getting a pointless degree in philosophy, and so I was going for an even more pointless study of language for someone that had no interest in really, studying the language further than that. But then I was like, well, now I'm completing this semester. If I went to a different foreign language, at that point, I would have delayed my graduation by a semester because I had to have those foreign language credits in undergrad. So I just pushed through and did 2 or 3 semesters. I can't remember. I know it was more than one semester.
Interesting.
So that's a sad time in my life.
So
Although I did, this is kind of funny.
Oh.
I don't know if she kept any of them. I wrote love letters to your mother in Latin.
Did you really?
Yeah, I'm sure the grammar was all wrong because I was really having a hard time.
Well, as far as I could tell, grammar's pretty fluid in Latin. You can kind of just arrange things however you want.
Well, I don't know. I'm not confident that what I was trying to say, I said, and she did not know.
Yes. Wait, hold on. So
let me finish. So I would have like a poem, really, in English on one side, and then I translate it into Latin.
Okay.
Yeah, so I didn't do that all the time. I did it several times, but
I thought you were going to go down exactly what you insulted Tolkien for inventing languages that nobody else knew, and you wrote letters to somebody in a language that they did not speak.
No, that's true.
Yes.
No, I was more practical than that. I couldn't. I think. Yeah. Gosh, I don't know if she kept any of that. If she did, it would be in that super secret little box.
Yes, I've seen that little box.
Yeah, it has a little lock on it.
Yes.
So I don't think you'll ever be able to see it. But who knows?
I think actually, like a lot of years ago, I cracked the code on accident and then was too scared of what would happen if I read anything in it. So I closed it immediately and didn't
It's like the Ark of the Covenant that would have melted your face.
Yes, I'm sure.
From a little Indiana Jones reference. Which I saw with my dad.
We're full of anecdotes today.
Yeah, I saw that movie with my dad, and I was like 13 or 14. I wasn't that young. Whatever year it came out. And there was a scene in there where those guys' faces were melting, and he literally put his hand over my face to protect me from the bad visual. I'm like, Dad! Anyway, so there you go.
Yeah, so aside from the linguistic difficulties, which is somehow how we got to this topic,
Yes.
there are the professional difficulties, and we're really starting to see fully developed schools within philosophy. But with that, you get this kind of technical jargon that doesn't make sense to really anybody outside of that school. So it's kind of another issue to translate. Then you also have this confessional problem in that most of the philosophers at this time are theologians, and they're really writing to kind of, prove their own religion correct and not so much about general philosophy.
More like apologetics or advocacy for a particular religious view.
Yes.
Which is actually, in my view, a little bit more practical than just thinking about thought.
Yes. You don't like thinking about thought.
Not just for the purpose of thinking of thought.
Yes.
The thinking of thought has to be thought out for some purpose in mind. Other than thinking. Moving right along.
Dr. Seuss paragraph there. So moving on, we start off with Augustine, and we kind of got the first half of Augustine way back in episode 3, but here we're kind of getting after his conversion to Christianity. And something that Augustine is notable for, he invented soliloquies, which are kind of, philosophical writing where a character talks to themselves, basically, or an author talks to themselves. And he also kind of adopted some almost Stoic principles, and that he said that to see God, the soul must not desire mortal things. And with that, he kind of casts out, passions of the earth and
the flesh.
Of the flesh, yes. And you have to kind of look inside to find God. And he also had.
I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
I absolutely do agree with that.
Some people think you have to get in tune with your emotions to really get truth. I think that's absolutely wrong. Mm-hmm. The lesson, I'm very much like the philosophy of Spock.
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
Yes, and then just another interesting thing that notion that he had was this idea of truth, and that true things may pass. So while it may be true that something is happening right now, that thing can stop. But the truth that it happened will always be eternal.
Yes.
Yes. So it is true right now that we are recording for the podcast, and while it may not be true and tomorrow that we are recording the podcast, but it'll always be the truth that we did record the podcast at this time.
And it was true that we recorded the same thing yesterday.
Yes, that is very true. Unfortunately true.
Did you delete it?
I did.
Oh, now it really is lost for all eternity.
You could hardly hear you.
Oh, well, then it's no loss.
Yeah.
All we get to listen to is you. Nobody want to listen to that.
Oh, yeah.
If you make a boring podcast, have you really made a podcast? I don't know. Go ahead.
All right, Augustine on history. So one of the big things that Augustine did was his work, The City of God, and it was the most massive of all of his works. And in it, he kind of starts off with this general history of philosophy, and he kind of recounts all of the philosophers that came before him, giving brief snippets kind of their lives and of their philosophies. And in that, he kind of looks to the Neoplatonists, and he calls them almost Christians. So these are the new followers of Plato's schools of thought. And he looks at them, and he kind of looks at Plato's ideas, and they're very similar to, what Christianity was at that time.
And with a specific reference to Plotinus, right? The Trinity?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, was Plotinus?
I thought Plotinus had something about... he didn't have it as the Trinity, but he had like the three...
He did have a Trinity, but I don't know if he was a Platonist.
Well, in his book, he talked about Plotinus.
Oh, yes, he did. Yes.
And his use of beauty and all that. Are you going to get to that next, or am I
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I wasn't even going to mention it.
You weren't even going to mention Plotinus? I thought he was like one of your favorite of the ancient Greeks.
I guess it just slipped my mind.
Is he one of your favorite ancient Greeks?
I do like him. I do really like Plotinus.
No, it's just his concept of
the Trinity,
beauty and flowers and the truth, or the seeking out beauty as the form or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they can go around it again. They can listen to the last podcast or 2 podcasts ago. They want to, but anyway, I thought you were into Plotinus.
I am. I do like Plotinus.
All right, go ahead.
Yes.
Next.
And so then after this kind of a description of the history of philosophy, he really goes into this denunciation of paganism. And he really kind of puts out this idea of a bureaucratized heaven that he thought was absolutely absurd. Because he looks at these ancient Greek gods, these Roman gods, and there were 3 gods for a doorway. You have a god for the door itself, you have a god for the hinges, and you have a god for the threshold. And he just thought that was kind of nonsense. And you're kind of, splitting up God to a point of ridiculousness in which you kind of strip him of all of his power.
You're kind of trivializing the spiritual world.
Yes. But he didn't really denounce the existence of these pagan gods. He believed that they were wicked spirits in human or taking advantage of humans. And so with this, we kind of get this first definition of like the difference between fallen angels and angels, because he goes back to Genesis, and he looks to this Platonic idea of daimones, because Plato believed that there were daimones just existing in the air that were kind of intermediaries between the gods and humans, and they could be good or bad. And Augustine looked at these, and he saw that these demons, these spirits, were the fallen angels. And so he looks at, the angels that God had made, and some of those, chose to become evil. So they were all, good by nature, but the upright angels were upright by will. The fallen angels were perverted by nature, or perverted by will, sorry. They're all good by nature. And he also kind of says that, the angels never really created anything out of nothing like God did. Only God can do that. But there are these kind of almost intermediary things between gods and humans, in that we have like the intellect like angels, but we also have bodies like animals, that sort of thing. So humans are like an intermediary between angels and animals.
If St. Augustine is right about this, then I guess Apollo is still around,
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, because they're physical, they're spiritual. So those Greek gods, Norse gods, or whatever, they're still spirits are still with us.
I didn't even consider that. That's an interesting, yeah.
And maybe, who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe it is a chariot going across the sky.
Well, I don't know if he believed that those things actually happened.
Oh,
but he believed that they were spirits that deceived humans. So I don't know if he really believed that they did those things that they're described as doing.
There was an episode of Star Trek on my Spock references that they had an episode. It was the original Star Trek where the Greek gods had moved. Basically, that they took their power, maybe it's Roman gods, from people's adulation, like that kind of powered them, and they needed that to exist. So they had, I forget, they ended up on some other planet or something. And
so it's kind of like Percy Jackson, in that the gods moved to New York City because that's where the most humans are, kind of. Yeah.
What if that's true? Would that be? I've never even considered that. St. Augustine would say, yeah.
I guess he would. He would.
I guess he's really wrong about that, probably. But, he lived in that age where people believed in him, so.
Yes. And so then we move on to Augustine's two cities, unless you had anything else you wanted to add about his history.
No, I went down the rabbit hole far enough.
All right.
Back up we go.
Yes, and so he describes these two principal divisions of human society. One division lives according to the flesh and all about self-love, and they glory in themselves, and they will join the devil and be destroyed at the end of time. And the other division lives according to the spirit, to love of God, and they are given glory by God, and will join God forever in the end. And he kind of looks basically back through the entire Bible. This started with Cain and Abel, and he works his way basically through all the Bible fathers, Noah, Abraham, Moses, as, kind of the guardians of this good city, the city according to God. And he says that currently, at his time, Jerusalem was the city of God, and Babylon is the city of the world. And that, Jerusalem, of course, holy city, and Babylon as the location of the Tower of Babel, in which humans were split, years and years ago due to, wanting to be like God upon earth.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that, the self-love bringing you away from God or things that are good or holy or whatever, whatever term you want to use. I think there's a lot of that going around now.
Yes.
A lot of people obsessed with their own love and their own
what's
interest.
Just best for them, not for anybody else.
That's right. I mean, we all have that as part of us, but I think our culture in the United States is more about self-love than probably anything else at this point.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Yes.
It used to be more community-oriented. I wonder if it's partly because of the lack of belief or participation in organized religion or not, but probably it doesn't help.
Yeah.
It's healthy to have a weekly reminder that you're a sinner and that you need to repent. Even if you just have to sit there and take it, from the priest or the minister or whatever your faith may be. I think it's beneficial, especially for me, just to sit there and have to listen to it. Just shut up and take it like a man.
That's pleasant.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's some truth now.
I think there absolutely is some truth. We shouldn't be, constantly reminded that we should only love ourselves. We should be kind of reminded, there are other people to look out for and, to acknowledge our own faults.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, moving along.
And so then Augustine kind of...
what about Gog and Magog? We gotta get
go ahead and mention Gog.
You want to skip over Gog and Magog and
that's when he talks about Revelation, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I'm not getting there.
Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to move ahead.
So I was going to just mention that this idea of eternal life being the supreme good that we should all try to achieve, and eternal death is the supreme evil. And it's really only through faith and grace that we can be provided the supreme good. So it's again kind of that Stoic belief that, cast out the earthly pleasures and look inside to your own soul and get to God. Now you can mention Gog and Magog.
Yeah, well, he talks about the agents, Gog and Magog, and Revelations, and enduring suffering and all that kind of stuff. I just thought the names were funny and
yes,
reference it.
So he talks a lot about Revelation towards the end of the City of God book, in that he kind of just basically commentates on the whole book of Revelations. And I guess a very pressing issue at the time was this idea of the resurrected bodies. So the Christian belief is that you'll be in a perfect body when you get to heaven. And I guess a big problem that a lot of people had with that idea was what happens to a cannibalized person, because part of their body is in somebody else. So how do they get split up once they get to heaven?
I guess that must have been more of a problem back then.
Yeah.
Because I'm not aware of a common feature of cannibalism. I guess because we don't have really people starving to death.
Yes.
In America.
Yes.
Although every once in a while you have some murderer eat something with somebody,
Mm-hmm.
Bad. But yeah, it's about the biblical passages about God resurrecting you in your earthly body for the afterlife and all that. So I guess that could get complicated if party is in somebody's stomach or intestines or something.
It's kind of interesting, though, that you're supposed to live your whole life not according to your body, and then you get the perfect body in heaven.
Right, kind of ironic. Why don't you give me that to do the first go round? I would have been a lot more happy. I'll give me that perfect body.
Yes. It's a big feature of heaven to Augustine.
I have to go to the gym all the time. Although my diet was undermined by my 5 pounds of Smarties I bought the other day.
Yes, he bought a 5-pound bag of Smarties.
I really just did that out of spite to your mother.
Yes.
Because she said I couldn't.
Yes.
I meant it as a joke that I'd buy it, but then she said I couldn't.
And so that was a challenge.
Yeah, and then I didn't because she told me I couldn't. But I went back later and bought it.
Yes.
Because she couldn't stop me. Judge me if you will.
Yes. And so that a big part of heaven to Augustine was that God will always be visible in the mind in heaven. So it's kind of, we're not always going to be looking at God, but he'll always be present in our minds. And that's kind
like
of our...
Sauron's eye. Always present, always looking for you.
I guess the opposite of that.
Really? Why not? It's the same thing, but it's a negative.
Yes, I guess so, yes.
It's a never closing eye,
yes.
Right? Always watchful.
Yes. But that's kind of like the goal on earth. We're supposed to always have God in our mind. And then once we get up to heaven, that's just a permanent state of being, I guess.
Right.
Yes.
But he also doesn't, somebody's, maybe I'm just passing over it, but nobody that I know of has made a convincing argument that God is good. It has to be good.
Really?
The creator has to be good. It's just assumed because he created that it must be good.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll get to it later because maybe I just haven't been paying attention.
So there's a section on God in each section of this book. So
yes,
we'll be talking about God 3 more times, I'm assuming.
Yes. Very good.
I did the math myself. Calculations.
Yeah. And then do you want to talk about the punishment? Like, isn't Augustine's theory that if you're over 51% bad, you're damned,
or not even 51% bad.
It's like any bad.
Yeah, so he believed, that there was no necessary temporal proportion between crime and punishment. So if you sin on earth, you're kind of just going to hell no matter what if you don't get that reconciled. And that is,
might as well
we've said
live
before,
it up.
I don't like that belief because it's like, the whole, if you're a foot under the water, it doesn't matter if you're 100 meters under the water.
You're drowning anyway.
Drowning anyway.
That's
and I don't
right.
like that belief, but it's interesting.
And there's some logic to it. It's like it depends on the sin, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I think some things it's hard to come back, but
yes.
But I guess if the theory is that God will forgive anything if you're truly repentant, you better be repentant on a regular basis because you don't know when God's like, I'm calling.
Yes,
right?
that's true.
So if you sin, you better.
Yes. This is what I kind of mentioned.
Confess that sin before the end of the day.
This is kind of why we have the Catholic conception of purgatory now, in that it is possible to still have sin on your heart and still go to heaven. You just have to go through this period of basically purging your soul, and then you can be admitted up into heaven.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
You don't know?
I think the life is a pass-fail.
Wow.
And then, because that kind of gives you a chance to do-over. Or not really do-over. You get a detention.
Yeah, I guess
before
so.
you graduate.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, earn some extra credit. Clean the toilets. Jeez. Again? Now you got to see and go to heaven.
I guess so.
It's like, I think it's pass-fail.
All right.
I think you're going up or down.
Well, that's not very consoling, so we move into the consolations of Boethius.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're doing a segue, sorry.
Yes, there's a bit of a segue. So Manlius Severinus Boethius was quite a guy. At this point in time, Rome is under the control of Gothic kings, and at different times there were different groups of Christians persecuted. And Theodoric was king at the time, and he was an Arian. And so there's a big debate in the Catholic Church going on at this time whether or not Jesus had two natures or one. And so the Orthodox Catholics believed that Jesus had two natures, one of God and one of man, but they were both co-equal. They both existed together, while the Arians believed that that Jesus only had one nature. And so there's this big split, and the Orthodox king was kind of cast out of Rome at this point, and Theodoric is on the throne. And so then we get to Boethius, and he, as a Christian, after the Orthodox Christian king returned and attacked Rome, he was accused just on the basis of being a Christian that he had...
being a Catholic.
Being a Catholic, yes.
Yes, anti-Catholic bigotry.
Yes.
Let's get this straight.
Catholic, yes. Just on the basis that he was a Catholic, he was imprisoned because it was believed that he encouraged the king to come back and invade Rome. And so he's imprisoned up in a tower, and it's there that he writes the Consolations of Philosophy. And so
it reminds me of Desolation of Smaug.
Really? Why?
It's maybe the same number of syllables. Go ahead.
Consolations of Philosophy? Desolation of Smaug?
Consolation, desolation. Go ahead.
Okay. And so the Consolations of Boethius were really these writings about Lady Philosophy coming to visit him as he's imprisoned up in this tower awaiting his death. And it kind of just encourages him that he lived a good life according to philosophy. And he really has kind of nothing to fear as he faces death. And so one of these big notions in this book, The Consolations...
I wonder if there's an English translation. This sounds like an interesting read.
Yeah,
do you think?
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, maybe I'll order it if there's one available. But I like this excerpt. It ends with this.
Yes,
This ends with this little joy you must banish to fear. All grief must vanish, and hope bring no cheer.
Yes, so it's
very, very uplifting.
Yes, so
it's my kind of guy.
So it's full of very stoic philosophy here, in that you should really govern by reason, and should kind of cast out the earthly pleasures. And a big part of it is kind of this consolation about the wicked. So Boethius is really concerned because he's like, well, it seems like the wicked prosper on earth, and it seems like they have all the good stuff going. And Lady Philosophy kind of tells them that even if it seems that they prosper, that's not true prosperity, because when they die, they will be punished for their wicked deeds. Yeah. And it's better to be good and to use reason when making decisions in your life.
Karma's gonna get you. That's right.
Yep.
And I like how you also talked about people boasting about how good they are, and he has this. There's a line in the book describing his beliefs. For a man to boast of his powers like a mouse crowing over other mice. Because we're all relatively insignificant as compared to God.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
And so he kind of...
I'm very uplifting today.
Yes, you're very, very encouraging. So he says that happiness is the highest good, but you can only really achieve true happiness through becoming into, God's will in a way. So it's like, even though, the wicked seem to be happy and it seems like bad things are rewarded, the only true happiness is finding God and then getting to happiness later in your life.
And I guess he means happiness as opposed to just joy.
Yeah.
Or
probably fulfillment instead of happiness.
Right,
yeah.
Right. That's probably how we would look at it, because otherwise you'd be like, I want to hire a comedian to make me laugh every day.
And that is God. The comedian is God.
Yeah, that's my midlife crisis goal, is to become a stand-up comedian. I haven't quite hit it yet.
All right. And so one of the other points in the Consolations of Boethius is this, idea about fate and luck and what is really predetermined and what isn't. And here Boethius says the same thing that I was saying on earlier episodes of the podcast, in that it's, God is outside of time. So it's a mistake to even look at his knowledge of everything as foreknowledge, because, there is no fore and after in relation to God, because, God is just kind of permanent in that sense. And so he kind of says that even though it seems like things are up to luck, or it seems that there is fate in the world, you do still have this free will about you.
Yes, it's supportive of your previous argument.
Yes, it is.
You and Boethius.
Yes. You made a weird face there. I don't know how to feel about that.
I was born with it. I didn't make it. Mom and Dad did. I grew into it.
Yes. And so then we move on to kind of the final Greek philosophers of late antiquity. So as we're moving into the medieval ages, there's still a couple Greek pagan philosophers still left. One of these was Proclus, and he based all of his ideas basically on Plotinus' Trinity, but he basically expanded everything by triads for some reason.
A multiplicity of triads.
Yes.
As we talked about last night, I was thinking that this guy's like in his room with like scribblings on his walls. Everything's triangles. There's everything's in threes.
Yes. So it's kind of just obsessed with threes. So he splits, the one, the mind, and the soul into threes and into groups. And this is kind of interesting. I actually missed this last night. Is that he believed that the pagan gods still lived within the soul of the big Trinity.
Huh.
So that was kind of fascinating to me.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you ever hear those people that say, famous people always die in threes?
Really?
Yeah, people say that.
I've never heard that.
Oh yeah, well maybe you get older and your heroes in celebrity culture start dying. Usually a woman will say, they always die in threes. There'll be a second death, and they'll say always dies in three, and then they reach for some sort of unknown celebrity as being the third. Oh yeah, who? I'm like, who's that? No, a lot of people, numerology.
Interesting.
Not really, but go ahead.
Yes. And so even though Proclus was very hostile to Christianity, he wrote a lot of works just kind of demonizing it and despising it. He still really heavily influenced Christianity in a weird way, because one of his beliefs is that the human body focuses both on earthly beauty and eros, and it seeks divine truth and mystical ecstasy with the one. So it's kind of like this acknowledgement that we can still appreciate the things of life, but we should, find true happiness in achieving God, and that was a belief held by Christians past that.
Kind of ironic that he hated Christians, and they're like, "Hey, that guy's right. We're gonna adopt his views for Christianity."
Yes.
Darn you.
Yes, and then we move on.
He screamed from Hades,
yes.
or wherever they used to think that everybody went to Hades, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
There were just different sections within Hades, like Elysium for the good people.
Right.
Well, that'd have been Greeks, not Romans, but.
Oh yeah, is he a Greek or?
Well, he's Roman now.
Oh, okay.
I mean, he lived in Greece, but it's Roman.
All right. I'll leave that there.
Okay. And so then we move on actually to a mention of a woman, Hypatia, and she gets like a whole paragraph.
Yeah.
Basically, all that's said about her is that she was kind of an astonishing mathematician and astronomer, but then she was killed by a fanatical Christian mob.
Yeah, tore to pieces by a Christian mob.
Yes. So
that'll learn you. Getting uppity.
Yes. So that's the end of Hypatia.
Yeah.
And we move on.
It's unfortunate that I bet you this before.
Mm-hmm.
It's unfortunate that women were not generally allowed to be educated. I don't think back in the society back then. So we don't know what we've missed.
Mm-hmm.
Because we never had the opportunity.
Yeah. And so then we move on to this next
ammonium.
Yes. No. Wait. Yes.
Ammonius.
Ammonius. Yes. Ammonius. So he was really just notable for his two students. So he was a pagan philosopher, Ammonius was, and he had two students, Simplicius and Philoponus, and they were basically complete and total opposites. In that Simplicius was the greatest admirer of Aristotle at the time. He was one of the last pagan philosophers, and Philoponus was Aristotle's greatest critic at the time, and he was very, very strictly Catholic. And so Philoponus really rejected this idea of the eternity of the world, and he says it has to have a beginning at some point and it has to have an end according to Catholic beliefs. But he did accept the Platonic belief of souls that existed before conception, which was not believed by Catholics at the time, which I thought was interesting that he's kind of picking and choosing between the Greek philosophers.
Do we believe in a soul before conception?
I don't actually know.
Because I know there's a passage in the Bible that he knew us before we were conceived. I think is the. But
I do know that like all of the basically important things that the Catholic Church teaches happen at conception. Like you find your vocation at your vocation is implanted on your heart at the moment of conception, and we believe that life begins at the moment of conception.
Yeah,
I don't know. Yes, but so then moving on from that, he believed that Jesus had only one nature, so it didn't matter how devout of a Catholic he was, and he was put to death. Yeah. So they do a lot of that during these times. They put a lot of people to death.
Yeah, it's a dangerous world to be a philosopher.
Yes.
In the Middle Ages.
And for Maximus, too. He was another one of these philosophers. And he condemned the doctrine of the single will and actuality of Jesus. So he believed, kind of expanding the idea of two natures, that he would also have two wills, a divine will and a human will, but they both were always in agreement.
Which would make it kind of pointless.
Yes. And for that he was condemned.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so should have been.
There's very good grounds for condemnation.
You're wrong.
Yeah, and so basically his biggest contribution here is really this new definition of the will, kind of how we understand it in English today, because there are kind of a lot of different definitions for like free will at the time could be used for a lot of different things, and he kind of set it in stone as this is, what the will is in a person.
Yeah. Freedom and choice.
Yes.
That's a good Devo song.
Really?
Yes.
When was Devo around?
80s, early 80s.
Yes, I guess I probably should have guessed from the name Devo.
They wore like red pots on their head. Like you put a plant in?
Yeah.
You've never seen Devo?
Yeah.
Oh, they're brilliant.
You
ever heard the
that
song
statement,
Whip It?
Yes, I have heard that song. Yes.
They had matching like red pots. They're like, I guess they're plastic or something. They look like a pot, like with a plant.
That somehow really surprises me and doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. Whip it good.
Yes.
All right, moving along to philosophy in the Carolingian Empire. Carolingian.
Yes, and here we talk about John the Scot, and there were two philosophers called John the Scot. Neither of them were Scottish. Yes. Right. And this was John Eriugena. Just kind of differentiate him from the later John the Scot. He was a very, very highly educated person, but nobody really knows where he got educated. He mastered Greek, and nobody really knew how he got there. And so he really served under Charles the Bald, who was the grandson of Charlemagne, the great French king of the Holy Roman Empire. And so he was kind of his, I guess, house philosopher in a way. And
that's a job I'd like, except for they kept getting executed and stuff.
Yeah, so it's unfortunate. Yes, and so he was kind of hired by,
kind of like a poet laureate, isn't it? Like a
bard,
like a make work job or something. Yeah. I guess we do kind of have house philosophers that don't do anything and get paid off by the government. Go ahead. I digress.
Yes, and so he was kind of hired to attack this monk Gottschalk.
Yes,
who believed that sinners had predestination. And the Catholic Church at the time believed that only saints were predetermined to go to heaven. And
I think Gottschalk makes more sense than the Catholic Church at the time. If the saints are predestined, you might as well have the sinners predestined.
Yes,
what's the point?
Yes, and so the Catholic Church belief that was, saints are predestined to go to heaven, and sinners are only predestined to have punishment. They're not predestined in their guilt, and so they wanted John the Scot to come and strike down Gottschalk's belief. And he sure did, but he also struck down the church's beliefs. So he said that there was no such thing as predestination at all.
He's in dangerous territory.
Yes, and so he was... Guess what happened next? He
was condemned.
He was condemned. He was condemned by the church. And so with that, he kind of... so he was condemned by the church, and then he moved on to this next belief. So he believed that there were four great divisions of nature, and two of these were both about God. There was nature creating and uncreated, and nature uncreating and uncreated. And those both related to God, in that, God was never created by anybody, but he is always creating. But God is also uncreated and uncreating as the final destination of everything. So it's kind of, he's the beginning and the end of everything.
Yes.
And all different forms of nature kind of flow between those 2 points.
And it was interesting how he describes God is beyond being, or above being, and therefore is nothing. So he's so big he's nothing, or so beyond our understanding, or beyond everything that he's nothing. Mm-hmm. That kind of makes sense. Beyond everything, beyond everything would be no thing, nothing.
Yes.
Huh. Anyway, the
guess
church,
what the church thought of that?
Well, they said he had defiled the purity of the faith with nauseating Irish porridge.
Yes.
But again, Irish bigotry.
Yes.
People hate Irish.
But he also actually, I didn't mention this last night, but he also put forth almost the beginnings of a heliocentric solar system.
Right.
Because he believed that everything revolved around the Earth still, but he believed that the other planets revolved around the sun.
Kind of makes you wonder how he figured they didn't bump into each other. I guess they're far enough apart.
Yes, I guess so. The sun isn't very close.
It's rotating around us. They're rotating around it.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess it's far enough away.
Yes.
You're right.
It's more than a few miles.
But he was closer to the truth than people before him.
Yes, that's very true.
But still wrong.
Yes. But sometimes he was almost so smart that his intellect became complete and utter nonsense. He said that in unity itself, all numbers are at once together, and no number precedes or follows another, since all are one. Which...
I think that's true.
Really?
Yeah.
How so?
Infinity.
Oh, yeah, I guess that's true. Because, I mean, relative to infinity, all the numbers would...
It's there.
Become, yeah.
Infinity is all the
All
numbers.
just be one, yeah.
Yeah, think about that. Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
And then he's also...
Which, by the way, I want to start taking up pipe smoking.
I think that's a terrible idea.
Well, I mean, I'm 50.
Yes.
Can I really get cancer from smoking if I start now? I've never smoked before. Not really.
I feel like you still can.
I don't know. Maybe I'm timed out.
I don't know if that's how that works.
If you pick up smoking in your 70s, you're probably not going to get lung cancer.
But it's probably not going to do good things to you.
Yeah, but how much bad can it do at that point?
Probably still a decent amount.
I don't know. We're going to find out.
Oh, no.
Anyway, go ahead.
And so he was also credited as having this discussion with Charles the Bald, in which Charles asked him what's the difference between a Scot and a Sot. And he looked in between him and Charles and he said, well, only this table. So I really liked that.
He survived that.
Yes, he did survive that. He was not condemned for that.
Yes. Well, he's a comedian.
Yes.
Everybody loves a jokester.
And so then we move on to Muslim and Jewish philosophers. And at this time, the Muslim people are very, very much responsible for spreading information ideas basically all around the world.
Yes.
They took a whole bunch of these ancient Greek texts and translated them into Arabic, and they took the numeric system from India and spread that to the West. And so they're responsible for basically just a lot of trade of intellect at this time.
And preserving it.
Yes, preserving it. Yeah, that's a big...
Sacking of Rome and all that stuff. And the burning of books.
Yes.
So they preserved that, translated, and I guess translated back.
Yes, and some of these early Muslim philosophers were very much just like general philosophers commentating on this Greek philosophical text. And one of these was Al-Kindi, and he is credited as being the father of Muslim philosophy, because he was one of the first to kind of just expand on these Greek beliefs, and he kind of made them available to the Arabic people. And then Al-Farabi, who was one of Al-Kindi's students, he set up these three divisions of philosophy: physics, metaphysics, and ethics. And so just kind of more expansions on just the use of philosophy around the world.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of neat to me how international it was back in the, like with Egypt and the Greek, basically in the Mediterranean, then now going off to Persia and all that.
Yes. And so then we move on to Saadia Gawan, who is a Jewish philosopher. And he was one of the first to really reconcile biblical doctrine with rational philosophy. So at this time when the church is kind of condemning everybody they don't like, he's one of the first to say, just take a step back. We can, look at the Bible and look at human philosophy in the same light in a way. We don't have to make them mortal enemies to each other. And so he also believed that human certainties come from sense, reason, and tradition, which I think is very true, and that, we come to a lot of our facts, just through our senses, thinking things through and from what's passed down from before.
Right. A lot of truth to that.
Mm-hmm.
He also had kind of the didn't he have also a theory about intelligent design?
Yes, and that was this is also his proof that the world was created in time. So he has 4 proofs for this. He says that everything in the universe is finite in size, so the force that holds it together must be finite and cannot have existed forever. He also says that the elements of the cosmos are complex but fit each other admirably, so they must be the work of a skillful creator.
I find that somewhat persuasive.
Yes, I think that's very persuasive, because this keeps coming up time and time again from different people too, so it's recognized by a lot of people. And he also says all substances in the natural world are contingent and need a necessary creator. He says an infinite series cannot be grasped or traversed, so time must be finite. So this is kind of his 4 proofs for that, though. The world must have had a start.
Very logical.
Yes. Then we move on to Avicenna and his successors, and his real name was Ibn Sina, but he was known as Avicenna in the West. And he was an Arabic philosopher, and he had mastered all of the sciences by age 18, so he was this super smart man. And basically,
in his defense, they didn't have a whole lot of science back then.
That's true.
No, I'm not trying to minimize that.
Yes,
it's just a joke.
But he's very impressive, and basically a lot of what he did during his time was just think and write encyclopedias. And so in a lot of this, he commentated on these Aristotelian concepts, and he modified them basically to fit the modern age at this time. And he believed that humans have a super intellect, this universal intellect shared between them to grasp universal concepts and principles. So kind of this, beyond just our senses, but also to, look at things that we can't really understand and wrap our minds around them. And then he also says that God's existence depends only on his essence, so he is eternal. So he's one of the few things in the world, that doesn't need a body. And so for that, he can be, infinite, and he only really depends on his own nature as God. So it's kind of like an expansion of that God only needs to think about thinking because thinking is himself, and it's all a big cycle, basically.
I guess he doesn't believe in angels or other demigods or demons.
Well, I don't know, because in Islam there are angels and jinn, I think.
Huh. Yes. Well, it doesn't mention it here. And
it doesn't mention it here.
But if they don't have any physical presence,
I guess
they could be eternal too.
Yes. I don't think he denies that. But he's just saying God is unique in that he only depends on his essence, because the angels and everything still depended on God first, but God was only dependent on himself.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yes. And so he also gives justification for Islam, but he's very much broadly philosophical, so he wasn't really an apologetic for Islam. He really focused mostly just on general philosophical concepts. Then we move on to Solomon ibn Gabirol, who was another Jewish philosopher. And he believed that everything has spiritual and corporeal matter, and that the world is a pyramid with God at the top and formless prime matter at the base. So kind of another one of these hierarchies of nature, essentially, breakdowns of everything. But basically, at the end of the 11th century, as we're approaching here, both Muslim and Christians condemned philosophy. So we're getting these theologians, even stronger than before, really condemning all this kind of, rational human thought, instead, saying that we should rely purely on religious texts.
Right. That's when it really gets dangerous.
Yes.
A philosopher, that is.
Yes. So then we move on to Anselm of Canterbury. And he believed that for an existence for God, he tried to prove that through believing that nothing greater can be conceived than God, so then therefore that God must exist. And I didn't really follow this. I don't know if I still do. You elaborated a little bit last night. I don't know if you remember or not. But.
Yeah, it's kind of like a self-definition. Like if there's something beyond reality, if you can conceive of God, then God exists. I guess is part of it.
But he is notable for actually, defending philosophy within a theological light. He says that, "I do not aim, Lord, to penetrate your profundity, because I know my intellect is no kind of match for it. But I want to understand to some small measures the truth of yours that no heart believes and loves. For I do not seek to understand that I may believe, but I believe that I may understand. For I believe this too, that unless I believe, I shall not understand."
Yeah.
So that's a good notion at this time, when everything's being condemned, that saying that we can still, look to philosophy in understanding God's creation in a way, and that we can look at the things around us and not, make it heresy.
Yeah, it's a good, very simple statement of a faith-based inquiry into a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, back then, they would denigrate rational thought and questioning of church authority. Now, it's like the opposite. If you have any faith and you can't be a scientist, it seems like, like the faith side is so denigrated and is so prejudiced against. This kind of a statement that reaffirms both have value.
Well, it depends on who is the religious person in question, because you can either be devout or radical, depending on who you ask.
I just mean in society.
Yes.
Like in American society, generally, I guess I travel in more Christian or religious circles, but it seems like you're denigrated if you have faith, and if you start contemplating these things and the concept of faith, and it's like, oh, you can't mention the Bible. Oh, all right.
Mm-hmm. And so he also kind of gives a reason for why Jesus needs to have two natures. So it's kind of like after they've had this whole debate over whether or not he has one nature or two, we kind of get a reasoning for why he actually needs two natures. And he kind of, it's very feudalist in that it places, human lives or lives in general with a cost basically to them. And so because human sin is an infinite offense, cannot be righted by just a human sacrifice. So it needed to be the sacrifice of a human and divine being in order to actually reconcile all of those infinite sins. Because otherwise,
basically reconnect us or reconcile us with God, because somebody had to make satisfaction for the sins against God. And the only one that could do that, I guess, is God. So God did it.
Yes.
Isn't that what he's really saying?
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. that has always kind of confused me a little bit, of Jesus dying for our sins type of thing. But that's actually one of the better articulations of the justification of why it had to be done to get done what he wanted to do.
I agree.
Makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So then we move on to Peter Abelard. He lived an interesting life. So he started off as a scribe to this man Rochelin, and he was studied under him, and this is where he kind of learned his knowledge of philosophy. And then at one point he was put in charge of his own school, and it was there that he had an affair with his niece, and he was castrated by her uncle, I believe, and it was then that he decided to become a monk, because, he did not have a good time at that school. And so he moved out to
Uncle Fulbert.
Yes, Uncle Fulbert.
A pair of thugs had castrated him.
Yes, so it's an unpleasant experience.
Kind of deserved it.
Yeah.
I don't really judge Uncle Fulbert harshly.
Yeah, no, neither do
I wonder
I.
if St. Augustine would say that tips the scales. Yeah. Oh no, you're going to hell. All right, go ahead.
And so he was really condemned by the church very, very many times. So he moves to this abbey, and he basically denies that the abbey's patron had ever been Bishop of Athens, and for that he was condemned by the church for heresy, speaking against their word. And so then he went to Paris, and he kept, writing basically about the Bibles, basically with a philosophical approach to the religious texts. And he was brought into conflict with Saint Bernard, abbot of Clairvaux, and second founder of the Cistercian order. And so he did not like Abelard's writings on the Bible, and he was condemned again by the church. And so he went all the way to Rome to the Pope to try to appeal this condemnation. And so for that, the Pope just condemned him to perpetual silence so that he didn't have to hear him again. And so he died 2 years after that perpetual silence. So he died peacefully.
Maybe we should hand that sentence down a little bit more in American jurisprudence.
Just condemn guilty people to permanent silence.
Silence.
Yes.
Just shut up.
Shut up.
Maybe we should have that as a rule for anybody who is a former senator or maybe even president. After you serve your term, you're condemned to silence.
Yes.
You'd probably be all better off. No lobbying for you. Just go somewhere quiet. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Yeah. So we move on to Averroes, whose real name was Ibn Rushd, and he lived in France, and he was a judge, and he was very learned in medicine. And he was a Muslim who, kind of similar to Abelard, defended the use of philosophy within, his religion. He defended it basically from the Muslim theologian, saying that, it is still a good thing to have for some people. He didn't defend it for all people. Because he basically believed that those who were born with, the superior intellect should study philosophy. They're almost obligated to, but they can't really share it with anybody because the stupid people should not learn philosophy and they should really only follow religious texts.
Just confuse them.
Yeah.
They just be confused.
Yes. And so kind of in spite of his own beliefs, he wrote 38 commentaries on Aristotle. So he says you shouldn't share it with anybody, and then he writes way too many books about Aristotle.
I guess you be careful who you let read them.
Yes, I guess that's true.
Yeah. Go back to the fields, plebe.
Yes. All right.
Well, he's kind of arrogant.
Yes, it's a very arrogant.
It's only for us, you dummies.
Yeah. It's kind of similar to
you can't handle the truth.
Similar to Plato way back in the day, saying that only philosophers get to enjoy the benefits of life.
Well, there's a lot of truth to that.
Is there?
And you are becoming a philosopher.
Oh, how lovely.
Yes, you might make the cut.
Yes, and so Averroes.
Circa episode 40.
That's the graduation.
That's right. We're gonna have a ceremony.
Oh.
You have a little tassel. You have to turn from one side to the other.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. So then we move on to Maimonides.
Maimonides.
Yes, and so his real name was Moses ben Maimon, and he was another Jewish philosopher. And he believed that kind of counter to, or I guess expanding on Averroes' belief that true knowledge of philosophy is necessary for true knowledge of the Bible. So this is actually a belief, held by Augustine way back when, that it's not only good for religious people to study philosophy, it's necessary to understand, the whole truth of God. And he's kind of putting forth the same idea that, if you want to fully understand your faith, you do have to understand philosophy. And I think it's really good that we're seeing these philosophers actually say that, we can have rational thought along with, religious text and everything, just to kind of not limit that area of thought.
Yeah, and I really liked his Mr. Kinney describes it as an agnostic view of theology.
Yes.
where you can't really know the nature of God because we just aren't capable of that kind of knowledge. So when we try to describe it, we're putting limitations on what God would be, and so he's just kind of agnostic about trying to understand the true nature of God.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It's very interesting. So he says, like, God is so beyond our understanding, to use our own words is kind of to limit God in himself. It's a very fascinating idea to hold.
I think he's right in many respects.
Yeah. And so then he also talks about divine providence and kind of fate and free will. He says that there is divine providence for humans, but for the other levels of nature, God does not control when a leaf falls from a tree. But he does have some control, over the fate of humans, just as, superior beings within nature.
And I don't know that argument really holds up. I don't know what the distinction, the really significant distinction between us and a dog or an ape or something. Mm-hmm. I mean,
relevant to God, there's really no. Yeah.
I mean, the differences. I mean, I think there are differences, but I don't know that argument in and of itself stands on its own 2 feet.
Yeah.
Because he's saying, well, the non-human world is too insignificant for God to care about. Mm-hmm. And so then it's like, well...
But God is infinite, so how can you really relate anything to infinity?
Right.
It's kind of like your same point about numbers, is that, all numbers kind of blend together into one if you look at it in the view of infinity.
Correct. Right. From the point of view of God, everything's insignificant.
There's no
in a way.
Distinction between 1 and 3 billion when you're looking at infinity.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all part of the same thing.
Yes.
That's depressing.
Why is
that depressing?
I don't know. I mean...
because you kind of contemplate your own insignificance.
Yes.
We all want to be a hero in our own story.
Yes. So that's the first half of these medieval philosophers. So next week we'll continue with the second half of medieval philosophy.
I'm enjoying the medieval people a little bit better. It's a little bit more in tune with what I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm. I think you'll really like the more modern stuff as we go through.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, a lot of the early ancient philosophers were really just trying to figure out what was going on in the world and not really looking at philosophy itself.
And all these guys had the benefit of reading the other stuff.
Yes.
So it's kind of like, well, we don't have to talk about that. It's kind of settled as to, then the psychology, develops over time.
Yes.
Scientific understanding of the nature of the world, what is it made up of, molecules and atoms, that kind of stuff. So that was a lot of the arguing way back when.
Mm-hmm.
What is the Earth?
It's very fascinating.
Yeah. You enjoying it so far?
I am enjoying it.
All right, good.
11 episodes.
Yes. 30 more to go.
29.
29. We will be done sometime in 2021.
Yes. And then we'll move on to, I guess, other topics. We can't end the podcast. We have
so
many devout listeners.
All 2 of them.
Yes. So that reminds me, actually, for our listener out there. Yes. Follow us on Twitter at Unlimited Opinions, capital U, LMTD, capital O, Opinions.
If you comment on Twitter, what do you tag people on Twitter?
Tag people. You can reply to tweets and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Adam will respond.
Yes, I will respond.
You will get your own personal response from the co-host of this podcast. Someday he'll be a famous philosopher.
Yes.
And you'll be able to say, he tweeted at me back in 2021.
Yeah.
Better screenshot it.
Yeah.
Because Twitter's going to delete it at some point.
Yeah.
And the great purge of philosophers will be condemned.
Yeah. So I'll be posting, updates on, when episodes are uploaded, and we'll see what happens with the Twitter as time goes on. If I actually get followers,
I might have to reactivate my Twitter account
just to follow the Unlimited Opinions Twitter.
Yeah, I deleted it in protest of the censorship. But before that, I never tweeted to begin with. So
it's kind of
it wasn't a big loss for the Twitter Incorporated.
Not a net loss.
They were not banking on my participation in the social media site.
That's unfortunate. You have a lot of ideas.
I do, but nobody wants to know about them. Well, that one listener in France.
Apparently. All right. Well, this has been Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
And I'm still Mark Bishop.
Glad you're still doing this still.
Yes.
I don't think that's ever going to end now.